Thank you guys for making it out. Thank you for coming out here to such worse weather than New Jersey. So as mentioned, we do these fireside chats, literal fireside chat.
I like that.
It looks like there's been a fire there at some point. Someone forgot to open the flue. It's a no longer working fireplace. But it gives us an opportunity to talk with our customers, our partners, people we're generally interested in. We've had, Emmy Award winner comedian to last. We had Levi's historian here last time.
Wow, those are hard acts to
No,
follow.
this
is going to be a letdown.
You wouldn't be invited if we didn't think you were
a total letdown, guys. Oh my god.
But no, we really wanted to take the opportunity for the team to get to know you better, for us to capture some of this content, and then of course we'll share any content that we share out. But it also gives us a chance to take our small company and our small space here in Oakland and project it out to the world and say, like, hey, other people out there, like, here are some of the thoughts from an innovation leader in the space. And so
I hope she shows up soon.
So I'll ask a few questions or kind of guide a discussion. Feel free to go off on whatever. Sometimes the tangents have been the best in the past. Feel free. And then we'll open it up for questions, and we'll get you to Fisherman's Wharf on time, too. So,
sounds good.
All right, sounds good.
This is fun.
Ed, are we good? Rolling? Okay. So I think when we first connected about a lot of things. But one thing that I found fascinating was your background and how you got to lead innovation at Avis Budget Group. So, I mean, first maybe start with kind of your role at Avis Budget.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And then I'd love to hear about, what's the journey that took you to Avis Budget, or at least some of the highlights that got you to that role, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I remember that first meeting, and Niles is too nice to tell people this, but I had blown off meeting Niles at least 3 times, rudely, until finally my colleague who helps with scheduling and things came into my office, and she was like, "You will meet with this person. You will be polite." Okay, Mom, I promise. But Avis Budget, so for the last over 2 years, I've been the Chief Innovation Officer for Avis Budget Group, which is global. And I think you know us as one of the big car rental and car share companies globally. Car share under the Zipcar brand, which Avis Budget bought about 5 years ago now. And it was already relatively mature. It was not an early stage company that Robin Chase started all those years ago, but still very much a product driven company and a separate brand and a different brand value and business model. When I came to Avis Budget Group, there had not been a chief innovation or a corporate innovation function per se. But the company was and is definitely innovative, I think, in the real and pragmatic, definitions of that word. Testing, piloting, having courage, treating failure the right way, expecting it in other cases, but never really formally creating a, quote, corporate innovation function. And I was just coming fresh off of being the very first Chief Innovation Officer for ADT, right, the home security company, where I'd been the Chief Innovation Officer for close to 5 years. Oh. The reason I say that is because my role at Avis Budget is really not just an extension, but it's a chance to take lessons learned at ADT and apply them in a connected but different industry, but to similar challenges that are actually at a larger, almost more global scale. I see how I've talked around what it is that I actually do. Cool. But what we learned at ADT, because I started there as this chief innovation officer, and I took that first interview with Narain Gursahaney, who was the CEO there, primarily because I wanted to ask him, what the hell is a chief innovation officer? What is this thing? Why are you hiring? I only took that interview, they were in Princeton. They hadn't spun ADT out of Tyco yet, so it was in Princeton, and I was winding down my role at a startup in Manhattan at that point. But a friend of mine who was the headhunter told me to take this interview. I would like Narain. I could get out of the city, go into the country. Princeton's not the country, but it's countryer. And that maybe I'd get some, free food for it, like a lunch or something. I did not get fed, by the way. I still tell Narain that. I had no spam. I think I got soda or something. But I remember I did. I asked him. That was the first question. I sat down with Narain and I said, I'm here because I'm told that you're somebody who'd have a good conversation. And what the hell is a chief innovation officer? And so we turned like this half-hour interview into like a 2.5-hour conversation. At that point, it was mostly about having someone focused on disrupting the company, right? It started off with Narain saying, we're about to spin this company out that has a 140-year-old brand. We're going to have great economics. Tyco's been really successful now that Ed Breen turned it around from the Dennis Koslowski days, and the nearest competitor, we're 4 times larger than the nearest competitor. And he said, and I'm terrified, right? Not just because it was his first time out as CEO of a publicly traded company, because then when they spun it out, literally on that day that I started, they rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. He said, but he said, I feel like we are absolutely ripe to be disrupted. And he said, we need to disrupt ourselves first. And he said, I need someone who works with me and for me, whose job is only that to begin with. And I said, well, disruption is not, I said, successful disruption in my experience happens not because you're trying to disrupt a company per se, although I think some people do it. It's because you're successfully answering and solving the problems that really matter, that suddenly, that pop up, right? That companies or people that are already on the scene aren't answering in the right way. So that's what the successful ones seem to happen. It's not because I'm going to take you down. But on the other hand, it was like an amazingly cool challenge. And it'd been a while since I worked for like a really, for a larger company. And I thought that it would be cool. And so it was great. We did a lot of things right. We did a lot more things wrong, really wrong at the beginning. I read all this. I read up because I hadn't been in chief innovation. I have a background as product, and we'll talk about that in a second, and different industries and weirdness. So, but I wasn't like coming from a consultancy that was focused on, I will teach you to be innovative, or I'm a corporate innovator. And I was like, I don't know what that is. But I read a lot, and I remember like leading up to it, and everything from like HBS studies on it to talking to people who are doing innovations within larger companies. And my takeaway from all of that homework was nobody knows what the hell they were doing. I mean, some things worked. It seemed to be fairly unique, but a couple of threads that kind of resonated were, take advantage of, if you're in a large company, then the greatest asset that you have in that large company are the people, right? And if you don't take advantage of that, you're stupid. That's like number one. And the second was, that as a common thread was, in a lot of these older companies, introducing in what you do, right? Which is approaching from a customer-centric perspective, approaching from identifying the right problems to solve, approaching it from a team element, thinking about really, really being able to iterate and test out, and to be and to have the courage to pivot and to fail, right? Which in a lot of very large companies is very career limiting. So at the end of it, we ended up selling the company ADT to Apollo Global. They took it public, took it private. And then I thought that was really great. That was totally unique. That was a very, unusual set of circumstances that will never happen again, which was kind of like the story of my career up to that point, right? All these different things. So I thought at that point I'd go back, and actually I was helping to sponsor or advising a couple of really, really early stage, and I thought I'll do that. And then I got another call from another headhunter about a chief innovation role, and I was like, oh, come on, give me a break. And it was ABG, and I was intrigued, although I almost reacted the same way about ADT, because I was like, oh, home security? God, that's boring. It turned out to be all about the home, right? And families. So that was actually cool. So my reaction here was, rental cars? Really? And in fact, I'm Hertz Gold. When I was like, I think I got an Avis Wizard. Oh my God, I can't believe I just went on record for that. But it's true at that point.
We'll cut that out.
But no, you can keep it in.
Yeah.
Because I was like, because again, they were like, you'll really like this guy. You'll like Larry. Had the conversation with Larry, and I realized there were a lot of things that resonated that were very similar to the initial conversation with Narain. Scope scale was different, but this tone and timbre and the theme was the same, which was, here's this the CEO of a successful, on paper, publicly traded company, and his view was, we are not just ripe for disruption, we're in the midst of it. Mobility, because this is not about making a better car rental company. There's nothing wrong with that at all, in all seriousness. He said this is essentially about how mobility is changing, because how people require mobility in their lives, or how businesses require mobility in their commerce, is absolutely changing, right? Or is buffeted by these different things. And so that similarities sound fine. And what's interesting is I used him to prove, or at least to start some validation of this thesis that I had, which was, I was going back and I was looking at ADT and I was like, what did we actually end up doing, right, at ADT? What was, after 4 years, if we started this journey at the beginning of it was, I'm coming on board to disrupt the company, right? Let's figure out how ADT could get disrupted, and let's do it first, right? Which is kind of traditional. You'll see or hear or read or meet a lot of corporate innovation elements or departments. That is sort of the role, right? And it evolved over 4.5 years to something related but different. And it was unique to the fact that ADT was and is now still, again, a publicly traded company with a really proud brand, very service oriented. The strength of the company is in the field, is in the employees. And what is it that made it so popular that could actually make it popular as that industry that it's either in or is surrounded by is evolving, and evolving based on the customers, right? And that was the same thing with Avis Budget Group. So the thesis I had about why corporate innovation and what it was and why I think we had some successes at ADT, I asked it to Larry, and I said, look, Larry, let me ask you this. I said, when you think about wanting to have this unique new function of corporate innovation at ABG, is it because you want to create all these cool new products and services? And he's like, that's part of it. And I said, is it, and we kind of circled around. And I finally said, my definition of it is, it's because you want someone who's actually firmly focused on how do you significantly increase the value of this publicly traded company, but in a really abbreviated and accelerated amount of time, because you don't have a lot of time, not to play defense, but to play offense. Because you feel that this company has a tremendous amount of value that is still locked within the company, that it's not appreciated in a lot of ways, but especially in the marketplace, for what it is, for who it is, but also for what it could and should be in this industry, right? At ADT, we learned that lesson over 4.5 years, because we realized we played a critical role and had a critical service for families for businesses, but it was also all about connection and the evolution of the smart home and the smart environment, right? And we could and should play a role there at ADT. At ABG, that's exactly it, right? And so that's when we think about it, and when we explain internally who we are to our 30,000 colleagues, it's like what our job is, working with you, all 30,000 of you, is how do we 10x the value of this company, but in 1/10 of the normal time? And to do that, what we've identified is, well, first, we need to be a service and a valuable provider to a lot more people than we are today. And so a really simple metric for that, overly simplistic, is I said, think about how many people actually recognize our brands globally, right? Avis and Budget are in 180 countries, right? That's actually one of its strengths. Zipcar is recognized globally. I said, so imagine if everyone who recognized our brands actually was a customer. That would be tremendous. So that's a practical way to think about expanding your TAM, right? Yeah. So how do we expand the global TAM to all of these different people? Well, what do they need as mobility is evolving? How do they want to consume that? So it's not just a matter of a different product or the evolution or a variation of a mobility product or service. It's a new business model for how people want to consume that, where and when and how, based on what they have, based on what they don't have, right? And economics is part of that. So first leg of the strategy there is expand the global TAM. Do that by, testing, launching, and experimenting new business models and the products and services that'll provide that to expand it. And the third and final one, in order to do that quickly, is find and work with as many transformative partners as you can. Leverage the existing ecosystem of a 70-year-old company, which is pretty large, but also add to that ecosystem as quickly as you can, right? Which does involve a lot of new technical implementations, involves moving into the digital API economy, but also involves a lot of things on process and people, right? And it also means when we say disruptive and transformative, they're very literal. So in this last leg of the sort of three-part strategy of transformative partners, because we're a publicly traded company, we need to transform our image, which will directly affect, hopefully, our stock price too, but of who we are, right? Are we legacy or are we adaptable for the new? Right? Are we analog only, or do we actually understand the digital dance? Right? Are we the dinosaur waiting for the asteroid, or are we the small little mammal? Right? Or the cockroach? I think they both survived. But either way, right? Who are we, and who are we going to work with? And it's not just the really big names of a Google /Alphabet /Waymo. It's the History Project /Inwoven. We consider working with you, for example, as transformative for us. And it's not because you can move the needle with the media, although you do have significant media relationships. It's because you can literally, as well as figuratively, help us transform. How do we view ourselves? How do we begin to tell our stories in a better way? Right? How do we actually leverage that, the stories of who we are and what we do and where we do it, in a way that is powerful, right? And powerful not just from a commercial perspective that would help us build business, but powerful in the sense of every good business is actually a community, right? And so how do we leverage that partnership with you to create and expose the community that already is ABG, and to do so deliberately, right? And to not only embrace, but then to extend. And so that was really rambling.
No, you've actually gone through this is amazing. I feel inspired.
Did I answer all your questions?
No,
with,
it's great.
The first question?
I was like, I don't even know. No, but that's phenomenal. One, also, I appreciate, because my question was going to be, you're working with partners like us to transform, but how do you, ABG didn't have a corporate innovation officer. Mm-mm. You came into this, you had some ideas. How do you actually start that transformation process, what were the things that you did? How did you maybe identify where pockets of innovation were already happening? How did you approach it? Was it approaching it from a technology, culture, both? Just maybe talk us through what you kind of, how you kind of scoped that first couple years that you've been.
Yeah, you know, like I said before, the good thing was that I had sort of this rudimentary playbook and experiences from before, right? In a exactly the same role, which by the way was the first time in my career I ever had that, where like I had a job that had the same title and responsibilities as the previous job. So it was almost felt like cheating, right? But I'll tell you, you actually in your question you laid out a lot of the approaches, right? Because the objective, it's less the approach, because there's multiple ways as the objectives, right? And the first things that I wanted to do, and that I tried to do, is listen. And it's interesting. It's almost like listening to stories. The first and most important was beginning with the leaders of the company, is to understand them and what his or her ideas and visions of success were. Not because I was trying to find out which one was the right one, which was the wrong one. You're actually just trying to evaluate the people first. Because the company, any company, is not a place, although this is cool. It's the people, and what are they passionate about, right? And why are they so passionate they actually come together, you know, on this regular basis and expend all of this energy, you know, individually and together? What is that? So the first one is uncovering that story, and begin at the top and then go as 360 as you possibly can, right? And especially in a company like ABG or ADT, where the strength of the company, where it's very customer touching, you need to go out into the field as quickly as you can too, right? You can't just stay at headquarters. You've got to go out. And so just like at ADT, I went out to, and did this on a regular basis, like going out to spending time with our installers, right? Going out and spending time with customer care and call centers, and you know, not just jacking into the calls, but actually sitting there and talking and understanding. We did the same thing at ABG, but one of the lessons learned from ADT was it wasn't just a matter of interviewing people, which feels kind of weird and awkward when all of this, right? It was also a matter of starting to identify and coming in with a couple of projects and getting people to own them. And the way that you come in or identify the projects, again, hard lesson learned, is not to come in with your set of arbitrary projects, right? And say, hey, let's work on this together, right? It's through the process of learning and discovery and listening to stories is getting people to then say, to actually propose a project. And because they'll all say, well, what is this innovation thing anyway? You going to go create like the next iPad? What is that? Are we turning into a tech company? You know, ABG. And you know, for the most part, I say like 90% was very positive and 10% was very, very skeptical, which I think was pretty good. But what you want to do is you want to understand or identify with each key area and each key influencer at the beginning, was to say what is a project that they've actually been brewing and that they couldn't get done for a variety of reasons, right? And every influencer in the company always has 1 or 2 or 20 of those, depending on how long they've been there. And there's a reason for it, right? And there's a real frustration behind it, right? And you've got to get to a certain level of trust or slyness to elicit that. So while there are a lot of other ways and techniques and approaches, that's usually the most important one, because in your goal, in corporate innovation that's new in its big company, is 2 things. Goal 1 is the person who brought you in is taking a big risk, and therefore you need to support him or her and get some points on the board immediately, so that CEO can point to something relatively soon and say, see, that's why we're doing this, right? And it's good to have a mixture of these early wins. Some of the early wins need to be small and on the edges, because that's how you start building up that sort of cultural resonance. But you also need to shoot for the moon on a couple of them, right? You need something that clangs big, and you need to do it relatively quickly. And even if it's just positioning, it doesn't matter. You need to put points on the board, because that CEO has just created this new role, and it's not you taking the risk, it's him or her taking the risk, right? And so you need to be able to show some ROI sort of immediately. The second key thing, right, is you do have to understand, and you start working on, what does innovation mean for this specific company at this specific point in time with this set of people, right? You can't come in and try to impose, the templates and even the playbook, like I'm saying, that you had from before. You use those as clay, right? You have to go in there with fungibility, because and you also have to keep it in clay, so to speak. So you've got to create 1.0 of, this is what innovation is at this company, right? This is what the goals are going to be. This is how we want to try to approach them. This is going to be tied to, but still underlying that is knowing that this is a publicly traded company. You're here to increase the valuation of this company, right? So how do you do that? And what are the particular strategies? And there's the uniqueness there, right? So to me, those are the two key things that you have to do immediately. You've got to get points on the board, show the justification for it, and then you've got to arrive at a collaborative initial definition of what innovation is specifically for that company.
I was going to ask a lot. Again, you answered one of my follow-up questions, which was going to be, oftentimes innovation departments or groups can be seen as like the little skunkworks lab in the basement, doing interesting things that no one touches, right? And I mean, so it already sounds like you've kind of created a plan, and it was expected, like, hey, we're going to try to make an impact soon, and we're going to also not just be this little group, but we're actually going to touch all of these folks. Can you talk about the role of, communication about what you guys are doing and how you are going through the process, and how you tapped into a larger group of people to make innovation not just, again, something siloed, but something that is woven into the dynamics of the organization?
Yeah, that's again, really hard lessons learned. But there were some things that you kind of state up front, right, that I just sort of just trying out at ADT seemed to resonate, and then was very more deliberate about it at ABG, right? And so, and they need to be communicated out, not just to the senior level or to the leadership level, but it needs to go through. And one is that your ultimate objective or goal as a chief innovation officer at a company, regardless of size, is to no longer have that role, right? Is that you need to evoke the innovation that's already embedded in the people in the company, to the point where you don't need to have this centralized figure or this named element, right? So your goal as chief innovation officer is to put yourself out of a job, and you say that up front. It's like the first time that you decide to sign up for a marathon, even as a fat 40-year-old like I was, the best advice I got was to start telling people that you're running a marathon in 6 months, right? And here you tell people up front, literally on day one. In the first times that I started talking to people and getting to meet them, I was like, hi, I'm the chief innovation officer. This is what we're going to do. And by the way, my role is to put myself out of a job sooner rather than later. Right? That's literally number one, right? And then
How do people respond to that?
I think some people are like, what the hell is he talking about? But you know what? With most people, I think there was like this, first of all, it's a bit disarming, which is always good, right? And it also takes away what you had first said, which is these preconceptions of what corporate innovation could be or might be. An R&D skunkworks, hidden somewhere. These people who are, they're the innovative ones, right? And we're not, right? This feeling of creating an elite, right? Which is death to a healthy culture. And so it was really I think it was disarming, but in a good way, for me to say, even before I brought anybody on board. And that was the thing, when I started ADT, I was like, I deliberately didn't want to hire a team. Because the first two things that I said, and partly it was just defense. One, I'm putting myself out of a job, that's my goal. And two, I don't need to have a team right now because I have a team. They're all 17,000 employees at ADT. And so at ABG, it was the same thing. It was like, this role is going to go away sooner rather than later with your help. And it's going to be your help because all of you are the innovation team, right? So you frame that out first and foremost. And then, like I said, that's how when you set that up, the best allies that you have in these large companies, take a look and see who already is communicating out, right? Who already has company-wide responsibilities or accountability. And typically in most of these large companies, it's HR and IT, right? The two most maligned elements in a lot of companies, right? What I've learned, and if I were to ever put together a primer for a corporate, a chief innovation officer of a large company, those two are your immediate allies. Immediate. So communication of some kind is always embedded in both of those. And both of those are responsible globally, have elements and touches, right? And so HR is my partner for corporate internal innovation. Not just my partner, they're the lead. My role is to support them, right? So in fact, working with Inwoven at ABG, my internal innovation lead, Mike Hawes, and his team that you guys have been working with, he's actually a senior VP of HR. Wow. He's not on my payroll. I've also learned over the years to poach people, but not really poach them. It's like, here's a really cool thing. Would you like to work on this really cool thing? It's like, yeah, of course I want to work on that cool thing. It's also a good way of actually testing the talent, right? So Mike is this incredible talent on the HR side. He is our internal innovation lead. He's not on my payroll. I actually have a very small number that actually sit on Oracle, so to speak, right? That are on my town center, my payroll. But HR owns and drives. And when you tell people on a collaboration, like when I brought Mike in and said, you own this, people will be like, yeah, right. You're not my boss. What do you mean own? And you have to give proof points, right? If they say, well, I really need this resource, you got to give them the resource. Mm-hmm. So Mike's team, he has two or three people over on the UK side, because he's based in London, those people are either contract or full-time on the innovation budget, reporting to him, right? Because for him to meet the objectives, this is what he needed. So if you're going to trust your leader to do that, then you do that, right? But I've never wanted a big, my definition of success was not having a lot of numbers, right, in terms of people. And so part of it is just laziness too. I don't like doing reviews and there's all that stuff and so that's HR. HR needs to be your partner, your key partner in terms of internal innovation, owning that communication layer. And to your question about communication, they can and should do a really good job of always communicating out to the company, right? Even more so than your communications department. And in some companies, comms is actually attached to or part of HR, usually part of marketing. Sometimes if you're publicly traded, you have investor relations and all that, right? But who is communicating on the most frequent basis internally already when you walk in? They need to be your partner. Second, who's trying to solve problems on a daily basis and is known for solving problems and is the person that you're picking up the phone or sending the email to because you have a problem, typically at work? IT, right? Incredibly maligned as well. And so I learned the hard way, now leveraging the lesson, that the CIO and all those folks are, if they could and they would, there are development engineers there, always, right? And but it's not because, oh, I'm doing IT, but I'm doing this to pay the bills because I'd rather be doing this. I don't know what the individual story is, but all I know is that at the core of what a good product person does is solve problems for target customers. That means that good IT departments are product people, in a sense, right? And so they're immediate and natural allies to get stuff done, right?
That's great advice, especially for a lot of the innovation people that
Yeah.
we'll talk.
And don't hire people up front.
I like that.
Really don't.
Yeah.
Really try spend as much as try to get along as much as you can without hiring anyone. And then when you do, deliberately know that you're going to have a relatively small team, right? So A, they better be A players. B, they better be people you've been in the trenches with before, if you've got that luxury, right? And their ultimate initial skill has to be the fact that they can collaborate, that they can work with anyone, anywhere, right?
That's great. So when you put yourself out of a job in 5 years, if we're going fast forward,
or earlier,
what does, or when you hit your 5-year anniversary in 3 years, what does ABG look like?
I think ABG looks like a couple of different companies under one, brand, under one umbrella. Not necessarily a couple of different brands under one umbrella. I think in 5 years there will be a part of ABG that is solving the traditional problems of the traditional rental car customer, but doing it in a much better, faster, more connected way, and connected not just telematics, but very data-driven. I think there'll be another part of ABG, whether it's, and I don't know what the corporate structure will be, whether it's actually embedded within the framework, whether it's a spin-out, that will be looking at other people's fleets. So today, ABG is a fleet owner and a fleet manager of its own fleet, right? I think in 5 years, there'll be part of ABG, hopefully sooner, that has created really cool platform-based services for other people's next generation connected fleets that are doing really amazing things, including answering the need to make this greener, to make this a less congested world, right? To make it an economically more feasible and richer world for urban and suburban and hyper-urban, and to keep us from having to buy a second car because we don't need it.
So managing other fleets like the Waymos of the world.
Waymos of the world, or the fleets that will be meeting San Francisco's or Oakland's municipal needs, but not necessarily owned by the city of San Francisco or Oakland, but benefiting Oakland and San Francisco's and those cities. I think part of that is that's going to, and I think those cities are going to be a key partner for ABG moving forward. They're already a key partner for Zipcar, right? And their airports are key partners for Avis Budget today. But I think being part of the new, this new superstructure, this new ecosystem of what City 2.0 is, right? What that new operating system is that's tied to mobility and that's three-dimensional, right? I think we're a big part of that. And then I think in 5 years there's another part of ABG that is focused now on the global traveler and commuter in a very different way, that is stitching together on a personalized basis that mobility need when you're not at home and that mobility need when you are at home, right? And again, it may or may not leverage branded and owned ABG assets, but it would probably leverage at least expertise and everything else. So I see in 5 years that's what ABG could and should look like.
You'll be a chief innovation officer somewhere else. Maybe.
Yeah, I'll be doing
or
something
the next
else.
iteration. So two quick, biggest innovation, as you mentioned. There's lots of mistakes and failures. So biggest mistake or failure project that you ever worked on.
My God.
If you don't mind talking about it, I'm curious. And then I have one last quick question, and we'll open it up for
Yeah,
minutes.
sure. So, biggest failure, biggest mistake, which still had a lot of positives, which is really around the people on it. Probably was due to my hubris, right? I think sometimes you reach a point in a career where you start believing your own press, and you really think like, oh, I could do that, even though I've never done that, and I'm really not qualified to do that. I can do that, right? It's different than when you're like earlier in your career. Oh, actually, it doesn't have to be at any point. When you understand the challenge of the unknown, right? And you have the sense to be scared crapless, right? And to go into the unknown with that healthy caution, right? And it's like when you jump off the dock for the first time, right? But the opposite of that is is hubris. When you haven't done it before, when you're taking on that new challenge, and you just have this ridiculous, unfounded confidence based on what other people are telling you as well, that yeah, of course I can do that, no problem. I'll deal with it. It's the ultimate reality distortion field. Hence Canoe Ventures, right? Which is a great concept, building out this platform, creating value out of all of the data that's generated in 50 to 60 million digital cable households. And it is generating value and creating value still for Comcast and for others. But it was a joint venture owned exclusively by the top 6 cable companies. Had great people working on it. Really, really smart. A lot of people who I worked with there, I'd worked with before and I still work with now. But the reason why it was a huge failure is because I didn't acknowledge that I was in the wrong role, right? And I actually had the opportunity to put myself in the right role because I helped incubate it from a project to an actual investment in joint venture that 6 very large companies put a lot of money in, right? I let them down on that because I didn't look at myself and say, should you really be doing this? Shouldn't you be doing that? But so that was bad. And you learn from it, right? Yeah. I mean, you have to. So, and I think that's one of the biggest lessons, and it came a little later in life, but it's never too late. Hopefully, was really it's not just the trust your gut and that instinct, but know when to do something for the first time.
Yeah,
and know when not to, right?
Well, thank you for being human and vulnerable. My last question is, you got an MFA from NYU, right?
No, I attended.
You attended.
I attended. I actually don't have the degree. I ran out of money second semester. Well, I had money, and I decided instead of using it to pay off the last bit that I owed for the MFA program at NYU for screenwriting, dramatic writing at film school, I used it to help finance my part of getting married to Hillary, and then a driving honeymoon. Because
sounds like a good use of money.
Like 3 or 4 states. Yeah, and besides, like I went to NYU to not only to learn dramatic structure because I had some degree of it, but it was also, get introductions into the industry and get an agent. And so at that point, I had an agent, or I got an agent and got published and all this other stuff. So I was like, I'll save the $800 or $1,000, whatever it was, which is.
So my one question was, if there was a script that you wanted to write, what would it be about? Like now, now in your world, not then, but like now, if there's a script that you.
That's a really good question.
You don't have to answer, but I was just wondering.
No.
Like an idea that you've always kind of.
I'll give you two answers to that, just to cap it. Out of the blue, absolutely new. What I'd love to write a script about is I'd love to write a script about my brother, my late brother. and not from a tragic perspective, but because he was one of the funniest freaking people in a really strange way. And telling it from that perspective. He ended up being a banker in Hong Kong, right? And he actually probably should have been like an urban terrorist or something, but maybe it's the same thing. I can't remember. But so something about that's celebratory, and telling his story. What I really need to do before then is finish this play. I started this play almost 20 years ago. 20? Longer. Crap. Almost 25-ish, 26 years ago. I wrote the first act of a 2-act play. And I will tell you, all modesty aside, that first act was one of the best acts that I wrote. Maybe the best first act of my generation. No, I'll give you the premise. I'll tell you why. Really quick premise, right? I went to a college that unfortunately was well known for people jumping off bridges, and so the premise of this in the first act is that this college student, his roommate, unfortunately has jumped off the bridge in Ithaca, and at the start of the play, he receives a box is mailed, right, to his roommate from his roommate's mother, but it was sent to the roommate after he jumped, right? So the whole first act is like the introduction of this, and the friends and the people in the dorm all start speculating about what that is, and it gets to gets a little crazy, and it's the end of that first act. Right, and it's very contemporary. Well, contemporary back started in the late '80s, but now it could be like this really cool retro thing, right? You can hear the soundtrack that you put together for it.
Definitely.
But it was like, well, what's in it? Why'd she send? She knew that he was. What could it be? And there's a series of flashbacks, but it's actually fairly tight. Good first act.
What about you and Miles collaborating on this to get this?
Well, he knows about this even when he was, because my son is finishing up his MFA in dramatic writing at the New School. He's a much better playwright than I ever was. And I'm going to go see his play. I got to give you the dates because it's getting staged. But here's the problem why I haven't finished it. I don't know what's in the freaking box. I have written literally hundreds of versions of what's in the box. I've written versions where the box is never opened. I've written versions where other people open the box. I've written versions where it was all a dream. But it always comes down to having the courage to stick to one and say, that's the story. Right? What's in that box?
Interesting.
Right?
I love that. That's a great way. That was amazing.
I got to finish that.
Yeah, now I want to know what's in the box.
I know. It's like, so do I. Like for the last 26 years.
So we got a few minutes left. I'd love to open it up for any questions from the audience. Okay.
Come on, this is not a shy group.
Just feels so foreign to ask a question after that. What's in the box?
What? I didn't even think of it. That was a setup. For
exactly.
Have you met or do you know if any of the other car rental companies have innovation programs and kind of what their structure is? Is it similar to your methodology and your philosophy that you're going with, or is it different?
Is there a secret club, a secret handshake of like innovation officers at other?
Yeah, it's like the Masons. We're actually.
Thank you for smoking.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Good question. Embarrassingly enough, I'm not sure. Europe Car, which is French-based, I think, has an innovation lab, and they also have a bit of a corporate venture fund, and so they've done some smaller acquisitions. Our two biggest competitors, which are Hertz and National/Enterprise, I know that one or maybe both of them have the equivalent of chief innovation and or new product leads, which I think is great. And as opposed to a club, starting at ADT, like, what is it now, 6+ years ago, with this wonky ass title, right, of innovation officer, you do get all of these things constantly all the time. And I have met people either who are innovation leads at their own companies, or actually more innovation leads at consultancies who are trying to make other companies innovative, right? And I think there are clubs and organizations and things like that, but I'm not really good with that. I'm more on an informal basis, right? And also, just to try to answer your question, close on a serious note, I respect and I think competition is a healthy and necessary thing, right? As long as it's not the be-all, end-all, and the reason why why your product is what it is, right? I think the worst mistakes I've made leading product teams or doing new products over the years has been when the product is a direct competitive response, or the feature is a direct competitive feature, without really being thoughtful about and taking it as we should from the customer and the user perspective first, right? Easier said than done, especially when you've got marketing screaming at you, when you have the CEO screaming at you, when there's stuff out in the marketplace saying, well, they've got this, right? So, like just recently, we've been sort of bluntly taking the lead in a lot of things in terms of traditional rental car companies, which the bar was pretty low.
Well, even like the mobile app, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I started, the mobile app had been launched like 2 months before, and it was very innovative in the rental car industry. And you could look at other industries and go, well, that's a pretty decent app, but what's so innovative? Well, take a look at the state of the state at that point of what Hertz and everybody else in rental was doing, and Avis really upped the game, right? So that was also a key reason I started, was we already are upping the game.
Small aside, I actually remember being in a user group for the Avis rental car app before it had launched, way back in the day. And I think Jeff Kalin was on the other side of a mirror. Probably,
yes.
and I think he remembers like looking like I was sitting, I was on some tapes about talking about, because I was at Avis Business for a while, and I remember getting paid to do some user groups.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
That's
hilarious. Great. Oh my gosh.
It's cool. Other questions before we wrap up?
You were talking about making small win, kind of getting on board, versus like something that really climbs. Can you just give an example of like either of those things at Avis Budget Group?
Sure. The real examples of what we try to do, both small and large, right? So the small wins, we started by getting up some town halls. Literally the first month that I was there, we did some town halls in New Jersey, in London, or outside of London, in Bracknell, which is this council town that we have our European headquarters in, and then out here, actually, in San Mateo, right, and in Boston at Zipcar. And what we did there is we replicated what I'd done at ADT, which is in each of those we pulled in with the permission of managers, sort of a disparate group of employees to figure out a solution to an existing internal problem. Not a huge problem like, hey, how can we create the next iPod, right? But essentially taking an existing problem that people recognized, that felt it was solvable, but for a variety of reasons, whether it was process-based or what have you, had never been solved. So pull those in, right? Make them local. But here's the deal. Treat them and give them the tools of a startup, right? So we gave them all like access to a lean canvas platform, right? And which is a relatively simple way of identifying a problem and the target customers and the methodologies, and having them work through the canvas, arrive at some solutions that were testable, actually do the testing, and show the solution, right? In some cases, literally at ADT, for example, one of the things that had the most resonance was the fact that for one part of the customer process, we generated 3 letters, paper letters, And the small team that put it together ended up like doing one email and showed how it could be done. Now, in some companies, you have things like Lean Six Sigma teams that'll do that. Others, you don't, right? And so here, what we did is we try to identify in each some key regions, put some of those small points on the board, and then say, this is how others should do it, right? And then put it on a platform so that you get to the point where it's self-serviced, right? What you really want to get to the point is that it's a part of how managers, here's what you want. Here's a quarterly review. It's like, how many problems has your team solved? Who in your team solved it? You know, was it measurable? Right, that's really cool. How many problems do you have in the funnel, right, for next quarter? Right, and that you're testing and implementing these yourselves, right? That's where you want to go. And that when you hire, regardless of what the role is and what part of the company, that's an element of what you're looking for. Do you like to solve problems? Right? Do you like to work together? So those are the small things. The big thing is the very first deal, because corporate innovation, the way we've evolved it, it also is new business development. And there's an element of new product development. And there's identifying new potential markets, right? So it's a little bit of that smorgasbord. Is pick a disruptive partner that'll clang with the marketplace. So the very first deal that we struck was Waymo. Because it was like, open the eyes of the external world of the market to Avis Budget? Why are they doing that? Mm-hmm. Right? So after looking, it took about a month and a half of sort of trying to understand that we realized the biggest thing that we could do, Waymo had an emerging, a nascent, AV fleet, starting here in Mountain View. And I took the bet or the gamble of having a top-to-top meeting between John Krafchick, who's the president had just recently been named the head of Waymo, and with Larry, my boss, the CEO. Because a good friend of mine, who at that point, Marwan Fawaz, who was the president of Nest following Tony Fadell, right, had given me some insight into Krafchick because he'd met him. And I thought, okay, this could be a really big transformative move, but instead of taking the typical, nothing against it, biz dev route, starting in at that layer, going up and then raising it up, I was like, I don't have a lot of time. Let's do a top to top, right? So if there's going to be something there, it's going to be, the CEOs will like each other. They'll identify that there's something that could happen. Based on that, we'll figure it out. And that's what we ended up doing. We cut a deal, announced it, dropped the announcement on the wire, popped the stock 20% in that day. Kristen went down. But that was putting points on. And that, along with the smaller wins, though, literally in the first, 6 months of my role, Larry could turn around to his board, as well as turning around to the marketplace and say, this is how we're changing Avis Budget. And here's an example. You have to have those kinds of proof points. So if you're chief innovation at a publicly traded company, while the small wins are necessary to get things moving, you've got to identify a couple of big ones. You've got to swing for the fences on a couple of things, right? And if you miss, tee up another one, and tee up another one, tee up another one. Because that's primarily biz dev.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you again. I know we've got to get you to Fisherman's Wharf.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
thank you guys for taking the time today. And thank you, Arthur, for a wonderful fireside chat.
That was fun. That was really good. Thanks.